The studio was quiet, not in the usual polished way television sets are, but quiet like a church before a confession. The lights were warm but soft, casting gentle shadows across the room as Monica Lewinsky sat patiently across from Sophia Bush. This wasn't going to be a conversation for entertainment. It was something deeper, darker. As the cameras rolled and the world beyond remained unaware of what was about to be said, Sophia took a breath that seemed to stretch back over to decades. You could feel the weight of it, like gravity had just shifted in the room. "I've carried this for years," Sophia began, her voice low but clear, eyes fixed somewhere beyond Monica, beyond the studio, staring into memory. "I was 20 when the show started. You'd think that would be the most exciting time of your life. A major network role, my face on billboards. But behind every smile in a magazine cover was a moment of panic, or fear, or pain that no one saw." Monica nodded slowly, her expression a mix of empathy and focus. She'd been on the receiving end of public misunderstanding before, but this was different. This was about an entire system built to protect power and punish truth. Sophia continued, her voice trembling slightly as she peeled back the layers. "We were groomed to be grateful," she said. "They called us the lucky ones. And so when things started to feel wrong, when I felt degraded or humiliated or even physically violated, I told myself I was probably just being dramatic, sensitive. That's what they always said, that I was too sensitive." There was a pause, a silence that didn't beg to be filled. And then Sophia leaned forward as if what came next needed to be whispered, like it still wasn't safe, even now. "The showrunner," she said carefully, "he had this presence. People worshipped him. He was the kind of man who'd smile at you in front of a crowd and call you kiddo, but behind closed doors. He would break you down inch by inch. He knew how to twist the knife in your spirit." Sophia described the early warning signs, the belittling comments on her appearance, the backhanded compliments, the way her opinions in creative meetings were laughed off or ignored entirely. At first, she thought it was just the industry. Tough love, but it escalated. He started manipulating scenes, giving me the most emotionally intense material right after screaming at me off camera. I was always on edge. I didn't feel like a person anymore. I was a tool, something he could use to prove a point. And then came the moment that shifted everything. It was late. They were on set past midnight after an already 14-hour day. Sophia had fumbled a line just once. She apologized, but he snapped. "He grabbed my arm," she said, her tone flat, as if trying to make it sound less significant than it was. "Not just a hand on the shoulder, he grabbed me. Tight, so tight I had bruises for a week. And he looked me in the eyes and said, 'You're replaceable.' Don't forget that." Monica's eyes welled, but she said nothing. Sophia continued. No one said a word. The crew went silent, like it was just another day. And maybe for them, it was. That's how normalized it had become. The emotional abuse went hand in hand with the physical intimidation. Sophia described how she began to dissociate on set, how she'd stare into space between takes, her brain numb from the psychological toll. "I stopped sleeping. I developed stomach ulcers. I lost weight rapidly, not because of any diet, but because of the constant anxiety. I'd show up looking thinner, and they'd say, 'Wow, you look amazing.' I was literally falling apart. What made it worse was the complicity. Other people in power, executives, directors saw it happening. They heard the shouting. They saw the bruises, but no one stepped in. The silence was the worst part," she said. "It told me that I wasn't worth protecting, that my pain didn't matter as long as the show was successful." Sophia spoke about moments where she tried to get help. Once, she reached out to a studio rep. She thought she was being discreet, cautious. But word got back to the showrunner within days. He called me into his office and said, "So, you're having feelings now. Want to talk about that?" And then he laughed. Like it was a joke, like I was the joke. She looked down for a moment, composing herself. That's when I realized there was no safe space. Not on set, not at the studio, and definitely not in the media. If I'd said anything publicly, I'd be labeled difficult, unprofessional, emotional, and my career would have been over before it started. Monica gently asked what kept her going through those years. Sophia sighed. The fans, they were always so kind. They saw something in my character, someone strong, someone resilient. And I clung to that. I thought, if I can just make her real, maybe I can be her too. But off screen, I was crumbling. The years went by, seasons changed, the show ended. But the trauma didn't. Sophia described how, even after the series wrapped, the effects followed her like a shadow. I couldn't walk onto a new set without flinching when someone raised their voice. I was constantly scanning the room for danger, even when there wasn't any. That's what long-term emotional abuse does. It rewires you. She paused, then added something chilling. I wasn't the only one. Other castmates. They had their own horror stories. We've talked in whispers, over wine, years later. And it's always the same theme. Why didn't we say anything? Why didn't we fight harder? And the answer is simple: because we were scared. Because we were told explicitly and implicitly that if we spoke, we'd never work again. Monica leaned in, her voice steady. And yet, here you are, speaking. Why now? Sophia looked up because he's still working. Still praised. Still mentoring young actors. And I can't be complicit in that silence anymore. If one more young woman ends up in a hotel room, crying because of something he did or said, I'll feel like I helped that happen. And I won't. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. It's not just about him. It's about an entire culture. A system that enables monsters because they deliver ratings. Because they win awards. But what about the lives they ruin in the process? Where's our award for surviving? The room was silent again. But this time, it wasn't heavy with shame. It was charged with truth, with change. Sophia ended with a message that felt less like a conclusion and more like a beginning. I want people, especially young women, to know that if something feels wrong, it probably is. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't have to earn your worth through suffering. You are enough, and you are not alone. As the cameras stopped and the lights dimmed, there was a sense that something profound had occurred. Not just a conversation, but a reckoning. A moment of collective awakening. Sophia Bush had taken back her voice. And in doing so, she'd handed the microphone to every woman who had ever been told to stay quiet and smile,